Hi there everyone, welcome back to my channel. There are now banned cards in the Final Fantasy trading card game. So today we're going to be talking about those cards, and those two cards in question are going to both be from Opus 5, and they are Thaumaturge and Gesper. Now the first thing that we have to come across is why these cards have been banned. Now if you go through some of the tournament results from the last few big tournaments like Euros or Grand Opens or the various cups over the various different countries in the world, Turbo Discard has been a deck that's been a thorn in many players' side. Not necessarily because it's completely overpowered or anything. Now, it is considered a very, very powerful thing, but it's also, more importantly, considered very, very unfun to play against and very uninteractive, which goes against what the game is trying to do. So, Thaumaturge is basically a free card, but it takes options away from your opponent as opposed to something like Viking that gives more options to the player. It's restricting things rather than expanding them. And Gesper is a card that obviously if the player who controls Gesper has no hand, that it's no detriment to the player who uses it at all. Now, you could have argued that there could have been a rule instated, you know, a lot of people were asking for a rule to be stated where, you know, in order to use a card like Gesper or even something like Sephiroth or Squall, both players have to actually be able to discard cards in order to fulfill that effect. But honestly, I think that to be able to, to state one of those kind of rules, you have to change a lot of different cards, and a lot of cards end up getting thrown under the bus when it's probably not intentional. So I do think that this was definitely a choice to take. So then the next question to ask is whether I agree with the way that they've handled Thaumaturge and Gesper. Do I agree with the fact that they've been banned? And do I agree with the fact that they are being banned after Worlds? So for Worlds, which is in 2 weeks' time, Turbo Discard, as it is, will be completely legal. Now, I do agree to a certain extent with bannings, because I find it always very sad when cards get banned, purely because obviously people grab these cards. Luckily they're only commons, so it's not like anyone's collection has been like really impacted by it. I'm not sure that, you know, banning right before Worlds with, you know, no change to Worlds, I think it could have been, the announcement could have been left until after Worlds, you know, just to avoid any kind of vitriol from the competitive player base or people who are playing at Worlds. Or you could, or maybe they could have announced it maybe a week ago and the change be stated for Worlds, because 3 weeks is probably enough time to grasp those changes, especially given that it's going to be a 3-deck format. And the only shame I think that there's going to be is that obviously I like to encourage a lot of people to watch these tournaments in order to learn some things, but obviously if they're going to be watching a tournament where one of the premier decks isn't legal anymore afterwards, it would be a real shame to do that. But you know, this will lead me into another bit of discussion that I think is very important for all of us who play any card game really, but it's the argument of having a ban list versus rotation. So a lot of Japanese games like Yu-Gi-Oh! And Vanguard tend to have a ban list, whereas a lot of Western games like Magic tend to have rotation instead. So, you know, that's a discussion that we're going to have very shortly as well. But generally speaking, yes, I agree with the bans. When you have something that's so off-putting to new players that it doesn't really take that much, it doesn't impact players that much in order to, you know, further the game, yeah, I think that banning Thaumaturge and Gesper is okay, and Ice is by no means a dead colour or anything like that because of it. Turbo Discard could still even be played. You've still got cards like Buckaboo that, you know, are much more fair than Gesper is, and you could still play a deck like that. Argath is still around. There's still plenty of cards like that that will still make Ice and Discard in general a very powerful thing. It's not going anywhere. But I do think that that particular deck just riled a lot of people up, and it is very, very challenging to counter. There's a lot of, you know, you have to kind of bear that kind of deck in mind. And then, as I said with some of my stuff on Opus 7, cards like Laswell make it so that if a deck's best counter is itself, then it becomes a problem. So I think that preemptively doing this to kind of herald a new season, if you like, after Worlds, I think is a good idea. The other thing to bear in mind with regards to banning the cards before Worlds is that Opus 7 was only released last week, so there's not that much of a gap between Opus 7's release and then this, and Opus 7 is legal for Worlds, so honestly I don't think it would have impacted that heavily, like testing that had been done up until now, but I can see why they wanted to do it. Perhaps they were wanting to kind of show sort of the deck's viability and, you know, the impact it would have had on the meta afterwards if those cards had remained legal. So going into the discussion about rotation and things like that, and this is actually covered by banning cards as well, I think that a lot of people don't really see how these things affect the grand scale of things when it comes to a game. Obviously, one of our biggest objectives, and certainly one of mine, is to get new players into the game so that they find something new that they enjoy and hopefully take it to a competitive level if they choose to. Now, when you, for example, if a player that's new buys an Opus 5 pack and opens up a Gesper or a Thaumaturge and says, oh cool, I've opened that, and then someone's going to have to turn around and say to them, actually you can't play that, and that's kind of like, ugh, that's not too great. But similarly, rotation, I know a lot of people, and I mean a lot of people, that turn around and say, if rotation comes into this game, I will stop playing it. That's fine. There's no, you know, if that's your choice, that's absolutely fine. However, I like rotation purely from a selfless point of view. When it comes to a new player coming into a game that they don't know, and they're, say, 10 sets in, let's say that rotation, if it does start, I don't know anything about whether it will, but let's say rotation starts around set 9, 10 or 11. So first set, or first block of sets is removed from legal play. You then have, you know, a lot of people that go, oh, I've spent all this money and, you know, I can't get it back. And this there, I mean, to be honest, I could make an entire video discussing my feelings on players and their use of money within these games, because I think it's very different now than what it was even 10 years ago. But, you know, rotation I think is a good thing. A, it keeps the game fresh. It makes it so that, you know, a card that you've seen for like 3 years running isn't going to continue to see play. B, it makes things so much more approachable for newer players, because if they end up wanting to get into the game and there's like 12 or 13 sets that they have to try and get little bits from, they're just going to go, do you know what, I can't be bothered, that's too much effort, and it's very alienating to new players. But then that being said, you know, if there's only 3 or 4 sets for a player to get, and obviously some of them have been reprinted from older sets, then that's also fine. C, the other problem I see when it comes to newer players, say a new card gets released, and I know that Yu-Gi-Oh! Is very guilty of this, say a new card gets released that makes an older card really, really powerful. You've then got to go and find that older card when you're not even sure that that set is even being printed anymore. So then it becomes very, very difficult for you to build a competitive deck unless you've been playing the game since the start. So basically, my argument for rotation is the idea that I think that having it makes the game more accessible to people outside of the existing player base. Whereas I think that keeping it, you know, open-ended, I mean, for me, I've bought every set since the first. It doesn't affect me either way. But I don't see it as I've lost money if that set then goes out of rotation, because I've played the Opus 1 for 2 years now, and it's like, I've gotten 2 years of play out of that set. I don't feel that I need to, you know, make my money back from it. But, you know, that's, as I said, my opinion could be very, very different from everybody else's. But then, you know, going back to banning, I think that it's a slippery slope, and I think that if one thing gets banned, something else can always come and take its place to being the new busted card. And then everyone, because we live in the day and the age of the internet now, where there's something new that's broken, really overpowered, however you want it, degenerate, whatever you want to call it, if it spreads long enough, then yes, then eventually the, you know, creators of the game are going to take action on it. But if it keeps happening, then it ends up just getting further and further away from what it was when it started, and I think that that can become a real problem. So while I don't have a problem with Thaumaturge and Gesper being banned per se, I become very cautious when it comes to ban lists in general, because the alternative to rotation, which is something I've been trying to get to, is power creeping. And because at the end of the day, you have to make new cards exciting somehow. There's only so much design space within any given game, so obviously in order to make something exciting, you have to make it better. So, you know, you're just going to keep climbing and climbing and climbing and climbing until you reach like a critical mass, and then something broken is going to come out of it. So honestly, I leave it up to you guys now, and, you know, just sound off in the comments below. Tell me what you think of the bans for Gesper and Thaumaturge. Do you agree with the fact that it's happened? Do you agree with the fact that it's happened before Worlds as opposed to after? And, you know, is still, or the fact that it was announced before Worlds but the cards are still legal for Worlds, do you agree with that? And do you think that rotation would be beneficial to the game, or do you think that it would be detrimental to it? Anyways, I shall leave you guys with that video, and hopefully this will create some discussion for you. Sound off in the comments below and let me know what you think, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for many more Final Fantasy trading card game videos. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye!